Hello, we are going to continue our safety analysis workflow for the robot production cell by digging into the new HAZID workflow. So the HAZID workflow comes from hazard identification, ISO 31000, risk assessment, something that you can define for a whole bunch of different types of systems. We're going to try to apply it to a similar system that we've already done a HARA for, per ISO 13409, to identify additional adjacent hazards. Now, you may recognize this workflow builder because it's actually the exact same one we use for TARAs, HARAs, other safety cases. And you can click in and you can actually build entirely your own workflow if you like. See how it gets loaded right here. And you can see that, for example, we define every phase of the analysis defined by 31000 inside. So we define it as a sequence of strings, enums, references, all the different ways that you'd like to construct this. And you can edit it in a whole bunch of ways. You know, the prompts, the assumptions, the examples, the rubric, all the different properties that you'd like to use, which is why you can use this for all kinds of different mechanisms. Okay, so we're going to start by going into the HAZID library, which is typically populated from a data flow diagram or system block diagram or requirement specification. But in our case, we actually already populated it based on a bunch of input details about the robot production cell earlier when we produced a HARA in this project. So this includes descriptions, technologies, or data, a bunch of other stuff. You can click in and see a little bit more of the details. There's the type, the system type, operating modes, setup mode description, maintenance mode description, the function, all these different properties. So all this is going to get loaded into the item definition we selected. The button's a little bit hidden, but you can click select right here, and that'll load the current workflow. So it'll display which particular item we are using right here. Sorry, the alerts say Tara because that's what this is built for. You can see that there is already operating context generated. So we'll try regenerating this, and then we'll go through and we'll generate the hazards, the consequence analysis, the likelihood assessment, the risk evaluation, control measures, and recommendations. All right, so I'll start by regenerating and we'll take a look. I'll pause for a sec while that comes back. And there we have it. Looks like it came back and it said, okay, well, these are mostly the same because nothing's changed about the item definition. And you can tell that the operating context is a little bit higher level than a lot of what goes into the HARA, which is why it's useful to have this adjacent hazard identification risk management workflow. So all systems initialized and safety checks performed, descriptions, duration, and yeah, that's about it. Cool. During startup, so all the different operating context items. So let's generate the hazard identification. And here we have our first four hazards. So we have some affected persons in the environment. We have cause, we have description, controls, hazard category, an ID, and a location, and most importantly, traces to specific operating modes. This is a big part of what you'll be able to see visually in a future version of the product, for triggering conditions and references, all the different properties that we are able to use to effectively automate the entire detailed workflow that an engineer would perform when identifying all of these items. Let's continue by generating the consequences. And right as that came back, we got the control panel room, cascading effects that could cause a fire, an electrical fire, consequence type, the severity rating, reversibility, the severity level, all the different properties that we care about collecting for our consequences. So let's take a look at the likelihood assessment. Here we have it. So the cool thing you can see is that with a likelihood, with a HAZID as compared to a HARA, we split out likelihood and consequence and so on into separate phases, but we always track these back to specific hazards and likelihoods so that we have clear traceability and clear information about them at many levels. Several contributing factors, exposure duration, the frequency, historical data, and this is the really cool stuff that we can configure in this workflow for a specific use case. We can say, hey, we want to actually retrieve historical data from your data set or from a public OSHA data set or something like that. It's all stuff we can we can configure later. Let's continue with the risk evaluation. Here we have the risks. So we have a particular consequence, a hazard, a likelihood, a risk acceptability, and the justification, which means that when we go to generate the controls in just a minute, you're actually going to get some nice controls in place for these unacceptable risks. And here we have it. We have some preventative controls, engineering controls like a fire suppression system. We have